A new report from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce looked into what Donald Trump's proposed 10% across the board tariffs would mean for both our economies. The report's author, Dr. Trevor Tombe, joined us earlier to discuss the impact of these potential tariffs.
Well, a Trump win, we should keep in mind, would come with other policy changes beyond just international trade, some beneficial, some less so for Canada. But just focus on tariffs and not trying to overgeneralize things. If the states did impose a 10% tariff on everything across the board, then that would create some real disruptions to what is a very deep and integrated set of supply chains between Canada and the US. And so, what I did for some analysis in partnership with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is to try and look at what this 10% tariff would mean for both Canada's economy and the US economy. And we find that it would shrink Canada's economy by about 0.9 to 1%, which might sound small, but it actually adds up to about $30 billion a year in foregone income and economic opportunity. And we'd see big reductions in exports among some critical sectors, motor vehicle and transport, but also basic metals, chemicals, wood products, machinery and equipment, and energy is the largest export item that we send to the US. But things get a little worse if Canada retaliates. If we levy on the US in response our own 10% tariff across the board, there Canada's economy would shrink by even more, by as much as 1.6%. And that's equivalent to about $1,100 per person in lost economic activity. That's lost income, lost purchasing power. And so these types of broad tariffs would have considerable economic consequences for both countries. We make a lot of effort to get special exemptions to different types of procurement policies in the States, or we try to overcome the softwood lumber dispute, which has escalated under the current president, Biden, in the United States. And so that's an important job for diplomats in Canada and trade negotiations to try and make the case. But we've seen this type of policy enacted by the US before. President Nixon, about a half century ago, did enact a 10% across the board tariff, and Canada was not exempt at that time. And so whether or not we could successfully receive an exemption this time, that's tough to say. At least judging by the language in the campaign from former President Trump, it does seem as though it is genuinely seen as an across the board tariff on everything. But I also suspect there might be a little bit of negotiation there. And maybe that's in part what the former president is thinking about, seeing this as a tool, as leverage, as part of a broader negotiation. We have seen tariffs levied by the US not too long ago on steel and aluminum, things that are typically not subject to such duties. But there are provisions within any free trade deal, including the second version of NAFTA, including the World Trade Organization rules, that allow a country to enact measures that it views as legitimate to achieve national security objectives. And there are other ways in which a president might levy tariffs as well. And even if it was of a technical violation of the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, that would simply then initiate a set of dispute resolution mechanisms that can take years to resolve. And so there would be nothing in the short term, certainly, to prevent the president from doing it, even if it was a violation. And we should think about what happens in 2 short years. In 2026, the USMCA goes through a review. And at that point, the US would be able, if it wished, to signal its desire to withdraw, in addition to it always having the option to leave after 6 months. And so if this agreement was a barrier to their ability to levy a 10% tariff, the president has the ability to withdraw from the agreement and levy it anyway. So I'd say it's complex. It's something that we haven't seen before with either the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement in the 80s or NAFTA or now the USMCA. So it would be some new territory, and there probably would be some legal disputes, but at least in the short and medium term, if the president wants to do it, they certainly can.